I absolutely love South Africa. There's always something new to experience and explore. And I had an amazing time in Cape Town. Like, so much fun. It was literally something I needed to process and take time from the vacation, after the vacation, and just settling in back to my normal, you know, life of living abroad. But Cape Town was everything. And in this video, I'm specifically going to talk about some of the culture shocks that I experienced on my third trip to Cape Town, but essentially my longest trip. So welcome to the channel. If you're new, if you're not new, welcome back. My name is Ashley on my channel, Ashley in Africa. I share my experience of living here on the continent of Africa, currently in South Africa. I am the founder of the Africa Investors Academy, a community of entrepreneurs all around the world building location-independent businesses for the growth of Africa. If that sounds interesting to you, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, join us, and like this video, share it with someone else who would also find value in it. So Cape Town was amazing. As I mentioned, it was amazing. I had a great time. This time I went with my daughters. I have a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old, and this was their first time to Cape Town. So I had been several times. This was my third time going in about a year, and we were there for 2 weeks. We stayed all over in different parts of Cape Town, and we're gonna have some videos going up. That's not my thing. As y'all know, I talk and I share my experience with you, as well as advice, as well as insight and inspiration. But as I'm learning to vlog and share more visually, that's just gonna take some time. So thank you in advance for your patience. But culture shocks were definitely real. I did experience some things that I hadn't necessarily paid attention to on my last visit. And there were 3 things in particular. I think the third thing is probably gonna be a bit controversial, but it's something that I wanna address because it was shocking for me to see. So stay until the end of the video and you'll see number 3, which is probably one of the biggest shocks. So number 1 was the wealth gap. I raved and went on and continue to go on and on of the luxury that exists in Cape Town. And it is there. The luxury is there. The wealth is there. It is very clear that some of the richest people in the world own property and play in Cape Town. Now, during the time that I was there was off season, so it isn't the time where you're seeing a lot of it at play, but I don't necessarily need to see the people in the mansions to know that there's wealth about Cape Town. Some of the different places that I went were, I think, was it something George Burgundy Estates, Takai, Hout Bay, Camps Bay, of course. And what is the other place? Really opulent area that I was just blown away by. But the wealth is there, and there's an extreme wealth gap. So one of the areas that we were staying in, which was Sea Point, which we loved, it was amazing. There was just walking to places to eat, walking to the grocery store, which is a very walkable area. You just couldn't help but see and experience the smells of people that are clearly living on the street. And so even as you're walking up to these incredible multi-million-dollar Sea Point homes, seafront homes, there's people laying on the ground. There's things that you're seeing and experiencing and smelling that you're like, wow, okay, this is a lot. And so I did mention this a bit in one of my past videos, and I do understand the concept of these folks not being necessarily from this country, but people are people. And seeing that wealth gap as clear as I did gave me a step back, right? Because even if I'm living in these beautiful, wealthy areas, I'm gonna be seeing that separation, that gap. When we stayed in Hope Bay, it was the same thing. Now, it wasn't as visible as like on the street, but Hope Bay is positioned in between 2 major, where we were, 2 big townships. And if we walked to one direction, we were literally, less than a half a kilometer away from a township and less from, also by a taxi meetup, right? And so those things are fine, having grown up in the areas that I grew up in. Like, yeah, like poverty is real, but to see it so close together was a bit of a shock. In the US, we talk about how you can be on one really, really nice street and then the next street you're in a ghetto. But our ghettos in America are different than the way these townships are set up. And that was hard to see. That was really hard to see. I don't know the solution, right? I don't know. I advocate for entrepreneurship. I advocate for those things, but these things are deeper than that. These things are remnants of apartheid. These things are remnants of a trauma that has and continues to fester in homes of people that, are still dealing with that experience. People that come from all over the world, all parts of the continent of Africa, to get additional opportunities to come to South Africa, and things don't necessarily go right. But again, I don't know the answer, but seeing it in the way that I saw it with the girls, because we haven't seen homelessness, in Tanzania, we didn't see it. We don't necessarily see it in Johannesburg, in the areas that we live. So to see it and for them to see it in their eyes was interesting. And I'll be sure to ask them. Maybe we'll do a video on that. So the wealth gap is a big concern. It was something that shocked me, and it was something that exists. And I don't know the answer. If you're a South African, comment below. Let me know some of the things. If you have ideas around minimizing the wealth gap. I know that there's active things happening in my country, but not to say that that's the solution, right? So let me know what you think in the comments. The next thing, kind of within that wealth gap, were the townships and the settlements, getting to see them firsthand, getting to talk to people that live in them, that don't have a desire to even be around them anymore. When I and a group of other moms and women, we went and did a wine estate with the kids. There were animals and there was wine, and it was amazing. I had a great time, and I was there were about 3 South African women, 2 American, including me, and a Botswanan woman, and our kids, right? Had a great time. It was amazing. It was fabulous. And the South African woman was from a township called Khayelitsha. And so on our way, she showed me, hey, this is where I'm from. And it instantly, humbled me, because now where she lives is a totally different story. Okay, the glow up is real. Okay, my sis has grown up and living in a beautiful home in the Garden District. And she showed me that she was from Khayelitsha, and I didn't want to obsess over it too much, right? Because I'm from the hood, right? But the hoods look different. The hoods look different here. And I just had a huge amount of empathy came over me for her to share that with such pride, right? With an amazing amount of pride. And I know that the parts that you mostly can see visibly may not be the only way that they look. And I didn't go into Khayelitsha. I didn't go to actually see other developments within, because I know it's one of the biggest townships if not the biggest, in Cape Town. But I was honored and humbled for her to share that with me. And on the ride back, I actually watched how massive it was, seeing that it stretched for kilometers and kilometers. And I also noticed that with whatever systems exist, whether it's sewage, electric, everyone had a DSTV dish. And that was interesting for me to see. It was wow, some of these places don't have functional sewage systems, but people have televisions. They're consuming content. And I don't know if that's all a bad thing, But it did make me think twice of how in some of these spaces, especially underserved spaces where we live, we are kept idle through entertainment, right? We're kept calm through entertainment when our conditions around us are like a hot mess, right? And sometimes that idolatry, I didn't even connect the two, right? Being in a sense of being in that state of just like doing nothing, and not saying everyone is doing nothing, but being in a state of idleness, right? Where you're consuming content, but you're laughing, you're entertained, but your surroundings isn't necessarily the best. I can see how that can set us up for this cognitive dissonance, a sense that things aren't as bad as they really are, because we're entertained, right? And my sis made it out, and many people do, but not everyone does. And so that was interesting to see. I got, even going to Hope Bay from Camps Bay or parts of the city, certain Uber drivers were like, where in Hope Bay are you going? You know, assuming that I was going into a township. And also being like, I'm not going in there. These weren't necessarily South African drivers, I will say. But yeah, like it was interesting because the township in Hope Bay was like right next to, you know, an equestrian center. And staying in Hope Bay, my host said, hey, don't go that way. Go that way. And so it was really, it was interesting. You know, I spent time in Soweto when I'm here in Johannesburg. It being a township has a lot of, like, in places, certain development, right? So, and when I see township, when I think of township, like many of you think of township, we think of these kind of improper settlements, these makeshift homes that don't look very sturdy, don't look very stable, aren't insulated. And those are the things that I'm talking about when I speak of the townships that I experienced in Cape Town, and really at a per view, right? Just kind of peeking in and seeing like, oh wow. So it was definitely, you know, on the heels of that, with the wealth gap, it was like, okay, this place is dynamic, it's complicated, there's a lot of layers here. Yeah, those were some of my takeaways. And I think the third thing, as we get a little controversial, right? We're gonna get a little controversial, a little deep, was the xenophobia through the lens of some of the Africans that I spoke to. Now, as I mentioned, there were times where I was with multiple Africans and we were all having a great time. There didn't feel like there was anything. I also recognize that there is classism at play when we start speaking about xenophobia, because if you are poor and you are African, you automatically get the brunt of the xenophobia that exists, I think anywhere in the world, right? But specifically in Cape Town, I heard Uber drivers specifically speak about their fears of engaging with South Africans if they were not South African, based on their perceptions and their experience. And I had never heard that before. You know, I had drivers that were from Rwanda, from Somali, from Nigeria, from Zim. And they talked about, you know, just like, depending on how long they had been there, depending on their relationships, they all recommended and you know, that, yeah, like, you gotta connect with the people, you gotta speak their language, and, you know, you can make friends. But one in particular spoke just very intensely about the anger that he was experiencing from South Africans. And I don't want to speak on where he was from, because I think that that is a bigger issue when it comes down to, it's not where we are from, it ends up being our income level, our social economic status that puts us in positions of discrimination and oppression, not necessarily our race or where we come from. And so his experience was real. His experience was his experience, and I honored his experience. But it was so much so his experience that he did not want to drop me home to our very safe location where we were staying in Hope Bay, because of his experience of being an Uber driver, I think compounded with being a foreign national, compounded with being somebody of a lesser economic status in Cape Town, South Africa. There were conversations that I had with other, maybe middle class Africans that were non-South African who definitely felt inferior to other Africans, South Africans in particular, African Americans, which is a whole nother thing. I think, the privilege of being African American in Africa in many places looks different than the privilege of being African American in South Africa. There is a strong privilege that separates us from our African brothers and sisters, and it's interesting to experience, and I recognize that it exists. I don't necessarily agree, I don't necessarily think it's right, but acceptance is important on this journey, and it's something that for sure I acknowledge and I recognize to be a thing. If this is making sense, please be sure to like it. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm sure, as a Black woman from America, having a privilege, we don't know what that is in America, but it definitely exists in South Africa. And if you want me to do another video on that, let me know. I'm happy to talk about it and openly talk about it and get feedback from my South African family on why this may be a thing, why this exists. I have my own thoughts, but if you want me to share something on this, let me know. I'll happily do that. If not, I won't. Okay. The last thing, probably one of the most controversial to discuss, is experiencing the colored community. I have experienced it slightly when I was in Cape Town on these other occasions, but this time it was a bit more intense in that I spent the day braaiing with a colored family next to my friends and family that were from all over, Botswanan, American, South African, and the colored community. And I'm sure they don't even call themselves a community, but the coloreds. It was interesting to connect in that way. I was myself called a colored by a colored man. I went to a wine tour that was at an estate that was literally in a all colored community, like all coloreds. Went to a beach setting and there was majority coloreds. So it was interesting. It was interesting to see and be immersed, to recognize and learn about their culture. Coloreds are very unique to South Africa in the sense that their language is Afrikaans, which is only spoken in South Africa. And maybe other parts of Southern Africa, please correct me in the comments. Maybe it is spoken in other parts of Southern Africa. I think maybe Namibia, I don't know. The fact that their community is just like coloreds, that they're not necessarily as integrated. They feel very separated. They feel very isolated in their space because they are mixed with indigenous people, the non-indigenous people, the Europeans, Africans. There's so many layers to it. I think I don't experience them as much here in Johannesburg, although like in certain spaces you'll see like, you know, communities or like groups. Less do I see them, you know, really like intertwined. And I will say here in Joburg, for sure, I actually go to a dancing, like, you know, kizomba vibes like a couple times. I've only gone twice, but it's put on by a colored community, and Africans from all over the world come to this event, like so all over. And you know, it's a beautiful mashup of culture. So it's not to say that this is not happening, that there's not a mashup of culture. It's just to say that in Cape Town, there's a clear distinction, separation, somewhat isolation that exists. And yeah, it was a shock, right? It was definitely a culture shock. Speaking on it here, I'm sure is gonna be a little bit controversial, because I think I want to just understand the perspective. And I have heard some perspectives through the media, and I know colored people are not monolithic either, right? One doesn't represent the whole. And so I'm open to learning and understanding the plight and experience of coloreds in South Africa, because they're a very unique community of people that aren't recognized in many other spaces outside of this country. And I'm sure that feels very isolating. I'm sure that feels very, I'm sure it can't feel good, because it doesn't feel good to ever feel inferior or less than. And they're a clear group that represent this kind of feeling, and my empathy goes out to them, because I want to know, I want to understand, I want to love, and I share my love with this community. Not that they need it, not that they ask for it, but the experience of the community in these different spaces, it felt heavy. I will say that it felt heavy, even in the beautiful times where there was joy and laughter, and that could have been my projection. But that was the energy that I experienced in these different spaces with this group and community of people. And I don't think that comes from nowhere. I think it comes from a very spiritual space and a very intentional space. And so I'm open to having the conversation. I want to learn more. So leave me some comments, leave me some resources. There's plenty of documentaries that I've watched since leaving Cape Town, movies to understand more about this community, but give me a few more resources. If you want to share, I'm open to sharing. So it was a beautiful time, a beautiful experience. I am happy to share that experience with you here on this channel. I actually created a travel guide so that you too can have the similar experiences that I had with my family. So if you want access to that, please check out the pinned comment below to get access to that travel guide, so that you can experience Cape Town through my eyes for the 2 weeks that I experienced it. I would be grateful. I'd be grateful if you shared this video, like it, and subscribe to the channel. Until the next time, I'll see you soon.